Couples therapy is therapy where both people attend the session, both partners attend the session. And in couples therapy, the therapist, so for example, when I'm working with a couple, I'm actually connecting on three levels because I'm connecting with each person of the couple, and I'm also connecting with the relationship. A couples therapist is trained to work specifically with the relationship. So the relationship is kind of the main focus in therapy for couples. And actually, in couples therapy, there's kind of three reasons people come to couples therapy. The main one and the most common one is, of course, to save the relationship. Sometimes it's about ending the relationship in the best possible way in its current form. Quite a lot of my clients have children. As expats, they quite often have businesses together, they have commitments together. And so it's not about splitting up and going, to different corners of the world and never speaking again. It's about having a different type of relationship. So it's really about having the best relationship that they can have. 95% of the time, it's about saving the relationship. And then occasionally couples come to couples therapy because they're about to make a commitment. Perhaps they're going to get married and they want to work through any issues and make sure that they're going to have a really good relationship moving forward. There's so many ways that couples therapy can help people. And I think initially the first thing is about providing a safe space for couples to come along. Quite often, couples may have been having quite a lot of conflict for a period of time. They go through cycles of having conflict and then not wanting to argue anymore. So they decide that everything's going to be all right and they calm down, and that lasts for a little while. And then, of course, those problems come up again. And so they get back into conflict again. So, and they feel unsafe. They feel that they can't always express what they need to express because they don't want to start the conflict again. So the very first thing to do is to, for me as a therapist, is to provide a safe space for my clients so that they can feel that they can express themselves. And really, a lot of what goes on in couples therapy is communication. It's about learning how to communicate in ways that don't trigger each other, but actually people can be heard and they can express themselves. It's about resolving things from the past, hurts and betrayals that perhaps have never really truly been resolved. And it's about how to express anger in healthy ways. And it's also a lot about building up intimacy and trust again. And one of the big things is about couples getting to know each other in a way that they've perhaps never known each other before. They may have told each other about their childhood, for example, and things that have happened, traumas or different memories, different experiences, but they've not really fully understood each other and how that, the script as we call it, their background, actually impacts on how they do relationships today and why it is, how that might impact the way they behave towards each other. So we cover a lot, and there's more probably to say as well. There's a lot that goes on in couples therapy. Expat couples, well, they have all the usual issues that all relationships go through. But they also have some added issues that impact their relationship. So, for example, stress from being in a new country, a new culture. There's often a lot of bureaucracy that people have to navigate. And that can cause added stress to a relationship that may be struggling a little bit to start with. And quite often the thing is that couples are isolated. They move to a new country and they don't have the support network that they once had, or not quite in the same way. They of course keep in touch with people. We can talk on Zoom, we can WhatsApp, we can have various different ways of staying in touch with people, but it's not quite the same as being able to say, let's go down the pub and have a moan about my partner and then I'll feel better. Or, let's go for a coffee and talk over this worry that I've got with my partner. They don't have that quite often a couple is, I think of them as being on an island alone sometimes, because they're in this new country and they're spending an awful lot of time together and not having that sort of outlet of being able to connect with other people until they can establish a new support network. And then add to that the stress from the bureaucracy, and that's causes, that can cause stress for them. The other big thing I find for expat couples is quite often they've brought their problems with them. They've had this idea that they're going to move to a new location, it's going to be wonderful, all the problems that they've had are going to stay behind, and of course that's not the case. They bring their problems with them, and of course then they're isolated, they don't have their support network, so that builds on that. Another thing I find happens quite often is that one person in the couple is settled and happy and really excited, and the other person who thought that they were going to be really enjoying their new life is actually feeling bewildered and overwhelmed and homesick. And so there's this sort of conflict between them, a sort of confusion rather than a conflict between them, where there's a lot of guilt and confusion about where are we at, what are we doing, we thought we were on a certain path and now we find ourselves in a completely different place. And of course, if they're running a business, as a lot of expats do, sometimes they're spending a lot more hours and a lot more time and energy on that business than they'd realised. You might have two people trying to run the business, two people trying to be the boss, and that can cause stress. And the other big one, of course, is alcohol and drugs sometimes. People move to a country sometimes where it's warm, they're sitting outdoors a lot, enjoying a social life, having a drink, and it can become a problem. So all of those are things that actually are added issues that expat couples face, and they can all be worked through. As a starting point, what I find really useful is to help my clients find a place where they're both on the same page, because they've been spending a lot of time seeing things very differently and basically having this attitude of, well, if only you'd see things my way, everything would be all right. If only you'd behave differently, everything would be all right. So I very much encourage my clients to understand that each of them has their own reality and their own experience, and that's okay. They're each looking at an issue through their own lens. And if they can actually express to each other, I understand that your experience is different from mine, and while I don't see it that way, it's still okay, and I still acknowledge you that you have your experience. And when they can do that, it's a kind of meeting point. It's a kind of a place where they're not blaming each other, but rather being able to understand that it's okay to have their own reality. And that brings them together straight away. And the other thing I like to do is to help them create goals for their couples therapy. And those goals can shift as we go along, but to have some goals to start with, because if they have shared goals, again, they're at a meeting point and they're starting from the same page. And that helps greatly. And then through the sessions, I like to teach my clients certain strategies, communication skills, techniques, understanding how relationships work. Things come up in between sessions as we go along, so they always have a space to talk about that when they come into a session. And quite often it's really useful because it's an example of a typical dynamic or a way of behaving towards each other and communicating with each other. So we can use that as an example to work through. And then, of course, as I said earlier, it's about exploring their script. It's an opportunity for both of them to really understand why they see relationships the way they do, why they behave the way they do towards each other based on their past experiences in childhood and past relationships as well. So how do you choose a couples therapist? If you've never had couples therapy before, it can be there can be a lot of information out there and it can be a little bit overwhelming. there is actually an article on my website called How to Choose a Couples Therapist. So feel free to go and read through that. But for now, a few tips are, the very first thing is to make sure they're actually qualified in couples therapy. Because as I said, it's a very specific way of working, not just with each person, but with the relationship itself. And there's specific training on how to do that. So always ask if they're actually qualified in couples work. A good couples therapist will have reviews, they'll have testimonials somewhere on their website or in Google. So don't be shy to ask them about that. Supervision is something where a therapist will meet up with a qualified clinical supervisor once a month just to iron out any issues they have or explore their therapy work. I'm a supervisor. I help other therapists, and a good couples therapist should be having supervision once a month. It's mandatory in the UK. It's not so often mandatory in other countries, but it's a very good idea if your couples therapist is having regular supervision once a month. So again, don't be shy to ask them that. And they will actually offer you a free consultation because they want to get to know you just as much as you want to get to know them, so that they can make sure that they're the right therapist for you. They'll ask you specific questions rather than just taking you on as a client straight away. Do remember to weigh up the costs when you're researching a couples therapist, because quite often the more experienced they are, the more qualified they are, the higher their fee will be and the quicker they can help you. So in the long run, it'll actually be better for you. It'll be more saving for you than having a less qualified therapist that you could be working with for a long, long time and spending a lot of money on. I do offer a free 30-minute consultation for all my clients because I want them to get to know me. And as I say, I want to make sure I'm the right person for them. And if I'm not, I have lots of colleagues I can refer them to.